He didn't walk in smiling, shake a few hands, read a safe holiday message, and leave. The room felt different from the first sentence. Mark Carney stood in front of the Canadian Armed Forces and spoke like someone who understood exactly how fragile this moment is, not just politically, but historically. This wasn't a thank you tour. It wasn't ceremony. It felt like a line being drawn. For decades, Canada lived with an assumption most people never questioned, that no matter what happened, the United States would always be stable, always be friendly, always be there if things went sideways. We built our security around that belief. Our trade, our military planning, even our confidence as a nation quietly rested on it. And Carney, in plain language, made it clear that assumption is over. Here's where things get interesting. He didn't say this with panic. He didn't sound angry. He sounded resolved. The message was simple, but heavy. Canada will defend Canada. Not someday, not conditionally, and not because someone else allows it. While most people were thinking about family dinners, travel plans, or switching off for the holidays, thousands of Canadian service members were doing what they always do: standing watch, deployed, training, guarding borders, protecting allies.
CTV's senior correspondent Judy Trinh looks back now on Canada's strategy to defend its economic future.
Canada's new government will rebuild, reinvest, and rearm the Canadian Armed Forces.
The Prime Minister's clarion call to defend against a superpower's imperialism.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protection, military protection.
Donald Trump turned his threats into a trade war, pushing Mark Carney to turn the military into an economic shield.
Carney leaned into that contrast. He talked about light in dark places, about hope following despair, about the maple leaf meaning something real in conflict zones around the world. But then he pivoted, and the tone sharpened. He reminded everyone listening that sovereignty isn't guaranteed by good intentions. It's enforced by capability. And in a world that's becoming more divided, more aggressive, and less predictable, gratitude alone doesn't cut it anymore. Let's tell the uncomfortable truth most leaders tiptoe around. Donald Trump changed the way Canada thinks about security. Not because he passed a law or signed a treaty, but because of how casually he treated Canada's status. He mocked the country. He talked about it like a possession instead of a partner. He threatened tariffs. He destabilized trade relationships that Canada depended on. And in doing that, he exposed a vulnerability Canada had ignored for years.
And today, Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
Carney's first budget invests nearly $82 billion in defense over the next 5 years. There's more money for recruiting, training, and equipment. Soldiers are getting raises and bonuses for serving overseas and deploying in the far north.
The priority is the defense of Canada.
Most governments, when faced with that kind of pressure, try to smooth things over. They negotiate quietly. They compromise. They hope the storm passes. Carney didn't do that. From the reactions I've seen, that's the part that shocked people the most. Instead of flinching, he reframed the entire problem. If another country can pressure your economy, influence your borders, or shape your military decisions, then your independence is conditional. And conditional sovereignty isn't sovereignty at all. That's why this shift goes way beyond speeches. According to commentary from CTV's senior correspondent Judy Trinh, Carney's strategy links military strength directly to economic security, not as symbolism, as leverage, as insulation against political chaos elsewhere. And this is where the scale becomes impossible to ignore.
We are investing both in terms of capabilities, but also in terms of planning and programming.
Climate change has made Canada's Arctic and its natural resources vulnerable to foreign intrusion by Russia and China. Better weapons are needed to patrol from the land, sea, and air. In the past, 75% of procurement dollars went to American companies. That's being reduced.
We're not talking about a small funding bump or a symbolic promise that disappears after the news cycle. Carney's first budget commits nearly $82 billion to defense over 5 years, Canada hitting NATO's 2% of GDP target immediately, years ahead of schedule. Soldiers seeing real pay increases, recruitment rebuilt, equipment modernized, Arctic deployments expanded. For context, Canada spent decades underfunding its military. We praised service members constantly, but quietly left them working with aging equipment and limited resources. That contradiction became normal, and Carney is openly saying that era is done. Here's why that matters. Strength isn't just about deterrence. It's about not being forced into choices you don't want to make. And nowhere is that clearer than the Arctic.
Where we can, and then spending it in other places where we have to.
The Defense Investment Agency, created in October, aims to ensure that Canadian companies benefit from big procurements, like the plan to replace a fleet of aging submarines. The Navy wants 12 conventional subs.
Arctic isn't frozen isolation anymore. Melting ice has turned it into a strategic corridor. Shipping lanes, resources, surveillance. Russia has expanded its presence aggressively. China has shown quiet but consistent interest. And for years, Canada's ability to actually enforce control there lagged behind the reality on the ground.
Very simple. It's the only technology in the Navy that guarantees that we control our waters.
There are two competing bids. The Prime Minister visited TKMS, the German-Norwegian conglomerate, in the summer. Then in the fall, Carney visited the South Korean rival, submerging himself in Hanwha's proposal.
I'll be back in 60 days.
The contract, which includes manufacturing and maintenance, could be worth more than $100 billion. The winning bidder is expected to share the rewards.
Buying Canadian, both in terms of steel and aluminum. So that's not a surprise. I think for both submarine manufacturers, they would be looking at that. Obviously, the question of servicing these vessels over time. I mean, remember, this is a long-term investment. We're talking 30, 40, maybe even 50 years.
Carney is treating the Arctic like what it is, a front line. Land forces, naval patrols, air command, presence. Not slogans. But the boldest move might be the one that gets less attention at first glance. Where the money goes. For decades, roughly 75% of Canada's defense procurement dollars flowed to American companies. Canada paid, the U.S. industrial base benefited, and Canada remained dependent on another country's supply chain. Carney is breaking that pattern deliberately. His position is straightforward. Canadian tax dollars should build Canadian capacity, Canadian industry, Canadian jobs, Canadian technology. That's not anti-American. It's pro-sovereignty. The Defense Investment Agency, created last October, exists for that reason. It's designed to make sure large procurements, like the replacement of Canada's aging submarine fleet, actually strengthen domestic capability instead of exporting it. And the submarine program is massive. 12 conventional submarines.
Submarine supplier will be chosen next year. The decision on fighter jets is still up in the air. Canada has already purchased 16 F-35s from the U.S. With Trump's tariffs, whether to buy more is being reviewed.
I don't believe that we've had enough jobs created and industrial benefits done out of the F-35.
Then there's the Swedish charm offensive. The King leading the charge to pitch the Gripen fighter and offering to build the Nordic jet in Canada.
The government's steps to diversify our defense and trading relationships are absolutely crucial, but need to be accelerated.
The military budget will continue to increase over the next decade. The Prime Minister, along with NATO allies, has committed to spending 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. That will equate to roughly $150 billion a year. The cost of defending Canada's sovereignty.
Manufacturing and long-term maintenance included, a contract potentially worth over $100 billion. The winning bidder, whether German, Norwegian, or South Korean, will be expected to source Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, and create Canadian jobs for decades. This isn't about flashy hardware, it's about control. Submarines are the only naval technology that truly guarantees dominance over national waters. If you control your waters, you control your future. The same logic applies to the sky. Canada already purchased 16 F-35s from the United States, but further purchases are now under review. Not out of spite, but leverage. Some commentators argue Canada didn't receive the industrial benefits it was promised. Others point out that if trade can be weaponized, defense procurement shouldn't be blind. That's why Sweden's push to offer the Gripen fighter, built in Canada, suddenly matters. It's not just a plane, it's an alternative. And alternatives change negotiations. By 2035, Canada and its NATO partners are aiming for defense spending closer to 5% of GDP. That's roughly $150 billion annually, the price of sovereignty in an unstable world. This is the largest military and strategic shift in modern Canadian history. Not reactive, not rushed, intentional. Carney didn't just thank the armed forces. He reframed their role. He told them, and the country, that Canada will no longer stand small, dependent, or hesitant. That allies matter, but dependency doesn't. That respect comes from capability, not assumptions. In my view, this moment will be looked back on as a reset. Not because Canada became aggressive, but because it finally chose adulthood on the world stage. Canada isn't just protecting borders anymore. It's protecting identity. And that changes everything. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing. I appreciate you.